Welcome to Questrom Insights Live and the Susilo Institute for Ethics in the Global Economy webinar series. I'm Dave Epstein, Executive Director of the Susilo Institute, a part of Boston University Questrom School of Business, which examines issues and explores solutions to global and ethical challenges in business. As we discuss Patagonia today, I'm reminded of what our benefactor, Harry Susilo, commented to us: what is taken from the community should be given back to the community. Patagonia's stated purpose is we're in business to save our home planet. Literally putting his money where his mouth is, founder Yvon Chouinard donated the company's stock to a new entity, making the Earth Patagonia's only shareholder. All profits not reinvested in innovation or employees will benefit environmental causes. The one person charged with ensuring this Patagonia philosophy stays true is our guest here, Vincent Stanley. Vincent is co-author of The Responsible Company, which, by the way, I enjoyed and I think every business person should read, as well as Yvon's book, Let My People Go Surfing. Vincent has been with Patagonia on and off since its founding in 1973 in key roles such as head of sales and head of marketing. Informally, Vincent is Patagonia's chief storyteller. Among his accomplishments, he developed Our Footprint, a website outlining the social and environmental impact of its products, Worn Wear for used clothing resale, and Patagonia Books. He currently serves as the company philosopher and is a fellow at Yale Center for Business and the Environment. As a poet, Vincent's work appeared in the Best American Poetry. He and his wife, the writer Nora Gallagher, live in Santa Barbara and in Brooksville, Maine. My colleague and co-host, Nina Majar, is our behavioral scientist and professor of marketing here at Questrom. And, by the way, she was just named an honoree of the Thinkers 50 Radar class of 2023. Nina and I will facilitate the discussion. Please use the Q&A tab for questions. We'll save time at the end for as many as we can get to. Please feel free to use the chat function otherwise. So let's get started. Welcome, Vincent and Nina.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. And a warm welcome to Vincent, as well as actually to our Questrom family, which includes not only the current students, staff, and faculty, but also alumni, as well as other Questrom friends. So thank you for joining us. And
thank you for having me here. I'm very happy to be here, and hello to all the participants in the room.
We are very excited about you being here. So Vincent, as Dave has already laid out, I would say you have a somewhat unusual profile for a business leader, or at least some of the students, I think, would agree on that. So I think it would be good to start hearing about your journey. So how did you connect with Patagonia back in the days? And what has your relationship been over the years with the company, and as well as also with Yvon, the CEO, or former CEO, well, owner.
Yeah, former owner now.
Former owner now, exactly.
Well, I'm here entirely due to nepotism. Yvon is my uncle, and I was 20 years old and working in I had done a lot of kind of interesting countercultural things in the Bay Area in my late adolescence, but I ended up during a recession working in a car wash, Alvito's Pit Stop Gas and Wash #2 in rainy January. And my grandmother took pity on me, sent me a postcard and said, "Why don't you hit your uncle up for a job? I hear he pays his men $3 an hour." So I gave him a call, and I couldn't make $3 an hour. That was for the highly skilled labor, the hammer makers, but I could be an invoice typist and a packer. And then when the waves were firing, because I was a non-surfer, I was the last person in the office, so I would answer the phone and take the dealer order. So I got tapped on the shoulder and said, "You're sales manager now." And I said, "What's that?" And they said, "Well, you'll figure it out. We don't know either." And I did that for 20 years and hired the reps and got the first year I was there. Actually, when I started, it was only a Chouinard equipment for about 10 employees. That year we started Patagonia. Yvon already had the idea, but we develop the name and the logo and place some orders for the first 3 products, and then it got going. And my involvement with the company, again, I was sales manager for a long time, but vocationally I'm a writer. And when I hit 40, I thought, I can't have this big job and really teach myself how to write. So I left that, supported my family by writing catalog copy for the Patagonia and some others. And then gradually got involved in the environmental campaigns, first as a writer, and then that just took my interest, especially working on a plan to take out Edwards Dam on the Kennebec River in Maine, which was the first time a dam was removed against the wishes of its owner. And came in the back door, and for the past 10 years have pretty much had this job, which consists of teaching company history and values to employees, working with graduate students in design, environmental science, and business, and also working as a kind of evangelist for the V Corp movement. So that's it in a nutshell.
Gotcha.
So now you have this title of Director of Philosophy. I think that's the first time I've ever seen that title in a corporation.
Yeah.
So what is it?
Well, it's pretty fluid. I mean, we were trying to figure out what to do with me when I gave up operational responsibilities after we wrote the Responsible Company, or I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I had helped develop the original business philosophies back in the 90s with Evolve, these sort of 8 documents that became the heart of Let My People Go Surfing. And so what I wanted to do primarily was to teach company history and values to employees, to do the seminar style, 12 to 15 at a time. But the way it works out is also I've been kind of a voice for those values. And so whenever during COVID, it was sort of very actively at the table. How do we respond to these challenges when we were involved in responding to George Floyd murder and the tensions within the company about how we needed to change and expand our role for justice, equity, and anti-racism. Not much involved in that, but a little bit. So, and I think that I've been here so long that I'm a kind of a touchstone for people say, well, what did you do then?
So, this whole topic of values seems as a very important one, in particular for Patagonia. And Dave and I teach, for example, on the MBA level, ethical leadership, and we start out on the first day talking about values, in particular also students' own values, and we ask them to reflect on how that aligns with the values of the companies they have worked with in the past, and how that made them feel, if there was alignment or if there wasn't alignment. From your perspective, in particular, since you're saying that you are also in charge of talking about the values of the company to employees, why do you think is it important for you? And what I would also like to hear is, like, how do you teach it so that people are not just, or employees are not just thinking, oh, now I have to sit through a lecture or something on values, and then they walk out and it hasn't really done anything in them. Like, it seems like that Patagonia lives and breathes their values, right? So how do you get everyone in the company to also really feel that way?
It's really a good question. In terms of teaching the classes, the reason I do it seminar style is that we set it up to say, okay, we're talking about these core values, but it's not just repeating what you could read in Let My People Go Surfing or The Responsible Company. It's addressing the question of how do these values actually play out in daily life, in daily work life? What actually helps you get your job done, the job according to your job title, or what constrains you? Because we put a lot of constraints on employees. a fashion designer can go to FIT Library in New York and choose from thousands of fabrics for a spring line. Our designers can look at maybe 200 or 300 because we put constraints on, what were the labor conditions in the mills, what's the environmental vetting for the dyes and processes. So that becomes the heart of the discussion.
Mhm.
The education for me, part of your question, I don't know how to answer. I remember when we first adopted a mission statement in 1991, the first one was very lengthy: build the best product, cause no unnecessary harm, use business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. And I remember not particularly being enamored of mission statements, because to me, that language went up on a plaque on a wall with a little bit of lacquer over it, and then people would forget about it. And that mission statements represented how companies wanted to be seen, but not necessarily what they wanted to do, what they wanted to step up to the plate to do. But the one thing about our first mission statement that I kind of liked was cause no unnecessary harm, because it recognized that in the course of doing business, we do create harm.
Mhm.
That even today, for most of our clothing business, we take more from the planet than we give back. And everything we're doing is to reduce that level of harm, but there isn't much we do that actually creates positive environmental good. So I like that. But what I was surprised by was how much the employees took that to heart. They took that first mission statement to heart. And what I saw was that we began to embody that mission statement rather than it being a plaque on the wall. We'd always made the best product by our lights, but we did start to do things that inspired other businesses. We did do a lot of things to reduce the harm. And when we simplified the mission statement to we're in business to save our home planet, the same process, I noticed the same process at work. People would say, okay, what does this mean? How do I change what I do? How do I change what my team does?
Mm.
And I don't know why people line up like that, except that the company has been, I think it's cultural. And I think that the company has built up that capacity over the years, from the time we went through the very difficult transition of going from conventional to using organic cotton and everything in a process that just, put our employees through the ringer. They had to find an entire new infrastructure to create cotton sportswear. They had to raise their prices. And not a single customer had ever asked us to go organic. But once we took employees actually in buses, 40 at a time, to the Central Valley so they could understand viscerally why we were making this change. And they would get into the cotton growing country and smell the organophosphates that were developed as nerve gases for World War II and were used to prepare the plantings. When they would come back from those trips, they would say, okay, this is just as much a pain as it was before I went on that bus, but the company's doing the right thing and we're going to make it happen. So that's a cultural change that evolved over time, because once we made that switch successfully, our product people could ask the same questions about limestone and neoprene and wetsuits, the same questions about the water repellents that were used on our jackets. So I think there's an engagement where people can actually bring their personal values to work and not leave them at home. And it matches up with what the company consistently says and also actually supports. I think that's the key to that kind of change, or that kind of evolution within the company. I don't think it can be done top down.
Mm. Interesting one.
So on that, talking about these harmful materials that you wanted to stay away from. So I just wonder if you can talk a little bit about the transition away from those things. And I have noticed that, I think you even mentioned that still you have some products that contain some of these problem issues, these problem chemicals. And I know you're transitioning away. Maybe you can talk about how hard is it to transition, and why not stop selling those products?
Well, that's a good question. I think that in some cases we have stopped selling products. We had a really successful line of cashmere sweaters that we just moved away from because the environmental problems with growing cashmere, and we couldn't develop an alternative supply chain, and we didn't think it was important enough. The cashmere is lovely and soft, but it's a little different when you're dealing with a rain jacket, or you're dealing with technical clothing that protects people in the outdoors. And there, it's often a question if it's a high performance product that's protective of people in difficult conditions. Then the question about whether you're going to stop making it becomes a little harder.
Mhm.
What we do now is another thing we stopped making in the early 2000s. We made a line of eco rainwear, and so it was environmentally better than what we were making, but it was also boardy and stiff, noisy when you walked in it, and it didn't keep the rain out. So
Whoops.
we said, all we're doing is turning customers away from eco-friendly products. So we stopped doing that. And what we do now is if we're introducing, particularly when we're introducing a high performance product or line of products, sometimes we'll make environmental sacrifices for the first seasons, but we will work very hard to make the improvements that bring that product up to snuff. Some of the things we're really concerned about are we using recycled polyester and nylon, which is, I think we're about 85% of the way there. Is the product manufactured in a fair trade certified factory? That's also key to us. And we're doing pretty well on those standards. I think by the end of next year, we will be using 100% recycled nylon and polyester. It's going to take a little while longer to make the switch for cotton and hemp to regenerative organic practices. So we're not using chemicals, but regenerative organic practices actually give back to the planet more than they take. They actually build topsoil, use less water. If you regeneratively grow cotton, you use turmeric as a companion plant in order to keep the insect population down. So that gives the farmer 2 crops to sell rather than 1. So that's more of a 10-year project. But 85% of our environmental impact is in raw materials. And so we pay a lot of attention to that.
So if I actually then may pivot just slightly. So given that under Yvon, the company has really changed, right? That there was this deliberate decision to now move to organic, and you've also talked about how the culture has really grown more and more into it, right? It is really, it's part of your fabric. So how does Yvon, how does the company, how do you feel about the difficulty of maintaining that path when we are in an economic environment that is quite challenging? How do you maintain this path on which you are on, continuing to do better, especially also now that Yvon stepped back and you're thinking of who are the new owners, who are the new leaders within the company? How is that ensured that Patagonia maintains this path that you're on and doesn't switch back again to being a bit more conventional?
Well, I think it's related to I think the reason we kind of stay on this path is related to the cultural question. This is what we've learned how to do. I don't think it'd be a very good business if we switch to a kind of high concern over quarterly profits, or if we decided, okay, the Patagonia name is great, so what we're going to do is make very cheap products and milk the name for all it's worth, and will be able to give away more to environmental causes. But of course, the company will will exhaust itself much sooner. There's a kind of a second part to your question, is how much does the new ownership structure actually change the way the company operates? And it doesn't very much, because we don't have a switch. The board members of Patagonia become the board members of the Patagonia Purpose Trust and of Holdfast Collective, the two entities that control the company. Ryan Gellert remains the CEO. The senior managers are still in place. So in one way, that one of the great qualities of this change has been the continuity in the way that the company operates, so that for the employees, it's pretty seamless. The other thing, and we talked about this a little bit before the session opened, is one thing I think that I've noticed over 15 years. If you'd asked me 15 years ago, how does Patagonia operate as a business, and at the same time operate according to this rather aspirational goal of changing the way business is done, and I would have said, well, I don't know, but we had three subcultures. We had the product people who were the go-getters, doing their best to get high market share, keep their products ahead of their competitors. You had the tree huggers, who were doing the environmental donations and also looking at the company's practices. And then you had the bean counters, who were trying to make sure that the company had some financial discipline. And nobody ever won. Those three groups, nobody ever defeated the other, even though they might have wanted to. So the companies sort of grew by capillary action. But at a certain point, I think that the entire culture became accustomed to this three-tiered way of operating. And so now, if I'm an Alpine, say I'm the Alpine product manager, I know that I have to be innovative in my product line. I have to be relevant in the market. I have to meet my sales goal, my margin goals. But at the same time, I know that I have to get the rest of my products made in a fair trade certified factory, that I have to solve the environmental problem of, say, microfiber waste from the fleece. And I own this. I'm not relying on anybody else from the company. I'm not relying on the environmental people to come and slap me on the wrist if I'm not complying. This is something that I own and my team owns. So I think that's, to answer your question, how does the company keep going? That's culturally ingrained now. And so in a way, the question would be, how would the company stop that? I think it'd be very difficult to do.
So I'd like to ask an interesting question. So Anand Giridharadas' book called Winners Take All, he faults billionaires. I don't know if you're familiar with this, for making all the money and then controlling how that money is spent, right? So of course, I'm very aligned with tackling climate change in a big way, and I celebrate Patagonia for doing just that. But how do you balance these profits, making big profits to give it to causes, when you might be able to reduce prices and therefore get more people wearing more sustainable clothing and maybe helping the environment there, and then allowing people to keep their money and give it to the causes that they think is the best. And maybe even if you drop those prices, you can make, you get a higher demand and you get those profits back anyway. Can you talk about balancing that? It's like,
well, the company, I don't know how to answer that question entirely, other than the profits are healthy but not exorbitant. So I'm not sure that it could translate into a reduction in price that would appreciably make the products more accessible to people with less money. I think the other thing is that clothing is cheaper than it was 50 years ago for the most part. And I think that cheap clothes are made at the expense of the workers and environmental safety. So what we have done, our commitment is to making very high quality product that's extremely durable. Durability is one of the key components of environmental performance in a product. So what we've done is we introduced this idea of worn wear. So we created a platform by which, if we make clothes that last a long time, but people grow tired of the color red, or they get fat, or they get thin and they can no longer wear a jacket. The idea is to get people to recirculate, to keep that product in circulation, and then it also makes it available to people who have less money to buy a brand new Patagonia product. So what we're trying to do is to change, and Nina, because you're involved in the whole question of how do you change public perception. One of the things we're trying to do, and sort of famously did with our "Don't Buy This Jacket" ad, is to change the way people value their clothes, to valuing them for the experiences they have in them, for the longevity, for the durability, rather than for the newness, the novelty. Just when that first encounter you have with a piece of clothing when you put your credit card across the desk. So that's been the approach that we take, and we're strengthening that. I think we see it as a bigger part of our future than it is now.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say are currently the biggest challenges that the company is facing, also with regards to the future trajectory?
I think that there are a couple of things we see. One is we see that we don't want to cannibalize our business. I mean, we think that we're doing an awful lot of business in North America in terms of what the potential demand is and the potential market. We see a lot of areas of growth in other parts of the world. And we're very interested in this little food business that we've developed, because we see a big potential for that. And we also learn from that. And we see the potential to do positive social and environmental good through that company. The challenges, I don't really see them as I don't know how to, challenges is not quite the word. What I would see as our task for the next 10 or 15 years is to deepen the relationship we have with our consumers, and to continue to function very well as a commercial enterprise, as a profit-making commercial enterprise, but at the same time improve the work we're doing to work with other shareholders and with other entities in society to address the environmental crisis. The big challenges we face, I think, are external for all of us. That it's not just global warming, but it's also a thinning of the web of life. It's the loss of biodiversity, water shortages, and the social crises that go along with all of those things. So we remain focused on what is our work, but also what are the conditions in the world that we need to be addressing? How do we make sure that we are cleaning up after ourselves, and that we're also, with our business, addressing problems that need solution?
So do you, as a challenge, if you continue to grow, how do you keep the company from being bureaucratic and a little bit more structured and what are your thoughts about becoming a big company? You are a big company, but becoming a much bigger company, which necessitates some changes.
Yeah.
What do you
Well,
think?
we've already seen that. I think, and I've seen it at several stages, so that it, periodically as the company grows, it outgrows its systems. When it outgrows its systems, you have to bring in people from the outside who are familiar with those systems, and then you have to integrate the internal culture of the company, of the old timers with the newcomers. So I've just seen that, when we hit 200 million, when we hit 500 million, et cetera. So I'm always a little concerned. I hate doing authentications on my phone 5 times a day, or I didn't used to come into the building using a badge. But aside from that, I still think culturally what I regarded as the best parts of the company when I came to work here 50 years ago are intact. And that, I think, will help us go through it. We have an awful lot of good people who are really dedicated to their work. They're not, we have a few people always who are making a career, and Patagonia is a stepping stone along the way. But we have an awful lot of people who are really invested in the work of not only making products they're proud of, but also doing things in the world that they're proud of.
So then I've been starting to go through Q&A, and I've seen also that Andy King posted a question, and that reminded me that I actually also wanted to talk briefly or ask a question about ESG. So ESG, environmental, social, and governance investing has grown, increasingly popular in recent years. And I wanted to hear from your perspective, what are the opportunities or challenges of that development for a company like Patagonia? What are you seeing there?
Yeah, we're a little bit to the side of the discussion because we've been privately held. And I think that the ESG discussion really centers around publicly traded companies and also investors. So there, for several years, there was an awful lot of money opened up pursuing companies with ESG goals. I think the problems are well known. One is it's not very well defined. What good environmental, social, or government or good governance, how you define it. And at
But
the
are you
same
thinking
time,
also, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
But in particular, with the view also on your competition, I was wondering whether there are any thoughts you had with regards to that.
No, and just to finish the thought, I mean, I think it's a great movement, and I think it's really important, and I'm distressed at the current response, political response against woke companies or against companies that are trying to do social and environmental good. So, but overall, what I would hope for is a tightening or a more sophisticated, deeper descriptions of what good environmental, social, and governance practices are.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we are getting a lot of questions. Maybe let's just start going down these and see. The first one is interesting, and clearly from thinking about the way we teach students. And so this one is from Noro, and it said, there's a narrative of 4 Ps that you have, which is people, planet, purpose, and profits. And we teach 4 Ps as product, place, price, and promotion. So how do you teach that narrative?
Well, conventionally, you would see that as that. I remember that when I ran marketing, looking that up. You would see that as a subset of your business requirements, for in terms of the financial health of the company. On the 3P project, John, which was people, purpose, and people, planet, and purpose, John Elkington issued a recall 30 years after coming up with the idea, because he felt that it was not being used properly, that it was being used too much for greenwashing. But it also reflects one of the challenges. One of the challenges of trying to evaluate your purpose in a sensible way is that we've had 700 years of double entry accounting and financial analysis, and all of this is very new to talk about how do we rate our environmental and social performance. So it's difficult for companies to do, and I think that will require an evolution of practice over time to make it as easy to talk about your environmental and your social performance as it is in your financial performance, and as rigorous. We grapple with this all the time in terms of evaluating the especially the environmental performance of our products.
So another question here that I'm going to read by Joy Pereira, and I will read the amendment to her first question. It's saying, as we are seeing growing demand for textile recycling companies and more brands looking to adopt a circular model, I was wondering, is Patagonia planning to or open to expanding their mechanical/chemical recycling technology or services to other companies?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I think that would be more of a question for the people that we use. It's possible that it's an interesting question. It's possible that we could help make connections between the recyclers we use and other companies who are looking to do it. But I'm not, I don't know. I don't know if we're doing any of that work. We don't do the recycling ourselves. We work with other companies who do that. So
I guess just a follow up on that is, as you've developed a lot of these, this, I guess, intellectual property and how to do that, are you open to sharing it with other companies? Do you actually get out there and either publish or work with other companies that might even be competitors of yours because for the greater good? Is that part of the business plan?
We do. If we develop a new performance fabric, if it has no special environmental component, we'll often take a 2-season or 3-season exclusive on it, which is traditional. But if it has a strong environmental advantage, we will make that public. And we've done that, particularly with wetsuit fabric and with other fabrics that we've developed that have an environmental advantage. The quicker the adoption, the better. We've created standards for animal welfare for down products and for wool that we shared our practices and encouraged the creation of a standard that was as strong as the practices we had adopted.
That's great. That's really good. So I'll ask another question from the audience. John asks, one of my touchstones is Simon Sinek's "Start with Why," and it seems that you embody this leadership style. So maybe how do you attract? Do you attract people that you're hiring with this kind of philosophy? And tell me about why.
I think we do. I'd say when we started, we were mostly, except for myself, we were mostly climbers and surfers, and I think people who had a connection to the natural world, and also people who were relatively anti-authoritarian. So it wasn't, they were the ones to ask why, rather than accept an answer given to them outside themselves. We often attracted over the years people from different communities. It was a good place to work locally for people in Ventura, California, and Southern California. It was a good place to work for people in the outdoor industry, climbers and surfers and trail runners and fly fisher people. And increasingly, I think that the company has become attractive to people with strong environmental concerns. So, and we've been more public, we've been better known for that for the past 10 years, 15 years or so. So I think a lot of, in the hiring process, we often ask questions about, we're looking for what people do in their private lives and how they volunteer in their community, how they make connections, etc.
Yeah. So I have a question here from an anonymous attendee. He or she writes, I really admire a lot of things about Patagonia, but one question that always sticks with me is, how can a company, even as good as Patagonia, truly change consumer behavior in an impactful way? So much of the competition in consumer goods wants to encourage the opposite behaviors or values that you have described as the goal.
Right. No, we can't do it alone. But I think that it interests me that the level of impact we've had. And I think that there's now a movement with the B Corp movement, which is, I think 5,500 companies. There's a place for people who don't want to subscribe to this kind of consumerism to go. And so I think all we can do is to stay on them, to keep at it, and to keep putting that message across. But no, of course we can't do this on our own. But if we don't do it, I mean, nobody else is. That's one of the things I've discovered in the 30 years or the 30 years since the first 20 years. After 20 years here, I would say I was fairly cynical about what Patagonia could get done. I would see that we were limited as a group of people, limited in our influence and in our capacity to bring about change. What I've seen in the last 30 years is that we've made a difference. And I'm humbled by that. But it has taught me that the activity of a group of people can start to move the meter in the larger society, can start to help create changes in the larger society. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a related question. People sometimes ask about, they ask me or they ask other people at Patagonia, are you hopeful? And are you optimistic? And one of the reasons that interests me is that Yvon Chouinard, who I've known all my life, is one of the most pessimistic people I know. Mm-hmm. He refers to himself as a doombat. He thinks the world is going to hell and nothing is going to save it. But that doesn't stop him from acting. So I think that sense of agency, that sense of, okay, this isn't right, so we're gonna step up to the plate and we're gonna do something different. That's much more important, I think, than hope. And it helps to kind of clear the fog, to have that sense of agency and say, I'm going to work for what I believe in.
So if I may,
doesn't have a chance.
So to follow up on that, it's actually a question by Andy King, who is a professor here at Questrom in management, sorry. And he's asking, Patagonia has a revenue of $1.5 billion. Shane is $58 billion. To save the planet, we need to control Shane and companies like it. Does Patagonia have a role in that? So I'm not so sure that control is a right word, but yeah. What are your thoughts on?
Well, no, I don't think the only way in which Patagonia has a role is to I'm not familiar with that company, Shane. So I shouldn't talk about being an alternative to it. I don't know who they are.
I think we can compare it to maybe H&M would be a similar thing.
Okay.
It'd be more popularized.
Yeah.
It's a very large online retail, fashion retailer.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that our duty is to be an alternative and to also to help other companies that are interested in being an alternative. I think there's a role for government, and I think the EU is working on this to look at what the practices of fast fashion are. What are the social and the environmental fallouts from fast fashion? It's quite a it's kind of an ugly story. I mean, you had fast fashion companies who were burning inventory because rather than even discounting it, because there's so much of it. The idea is to create as much out in the market as possible, to sell as quickly as possible. And then if you can't, the world has that problem of what to do with it. The business itself doesn't. So I think it's a social. I think NGOs are doing a good job of revealing what those problems are. I think governments have a right to address this, and I think other kinds of businesses should be setting up a different kind of example. There's another instance during COVID where European and American manufacturers walked away from finished goods made in Asian factories. They just said, "Okay, you've made it, but we're not going to pay for it, so you keep it." So there's it's one of the problems with globalization is that the ethical implications of your actions are not felt in the place where your headquarters is, and that's a problem that it's also going to have to do with.
Yeah, so related, Jenny asks, well, she says, Patagonia is one of my favorite companies because of their strong values and actions. So not to be advertising other companies, but she asks, do you have examples of other companies with similar values and strategies that you are familiar with or worked with, or ones that you think are carrying the torch?
Yeah, I can offer a few. One is not a competitor, but B Corps have a score of that goes between 100 and 200, but you can get bonus points. So we're at 150, I think, on our last assessment, but Dr. Bronner's, the soap company, is at 206 now, and we just look at that and say, what are we doing wrong, or what are they doing that we need to learn how to do? In the clothing business, we have a lot of regard for Eileen Fisher. They took a lot of steps to really improve their environmental performance a few years ago. A Patagonia veteran is now the CEO of that company. Reformation in Los Angeles, which is a fast fashion company, but making things locally and also using environmentally more beneficial or less harmful fabrics. And then there are a lot of companies that are not necessarily, you wouldn't cite them for their virtue as a whole, but they do interesting things. Like Nike works very hard to minimize the resource intensity of its materials. And that's to be respected. Even Walmart undertook efforts to reduce the methane content, methane emitted from its cows by changing their diet. So, I mean, I think that whatever is done to improve environmental and especially social performance should be acknowledged, even when we don't necessarily think those companies wear white hats all the time.
And I just want to correct. So apparently, so Andy King writes, you say Shein.
Okay.
I think now I'm saying it a little better. So I apologize when I'm not saying the words properly. So there's one more question about there's one question about worn wear by John McGuinness. So he says many categories have a pre-owned channel, for example, automobiles, real estate. Is worn wear a bigger idea than we all imagine? Is pre-owned clothing the next big thing, from the thrift shop to the mainstream?
We hope so, and I think we'll be doing some work to make that the next best thing.
Yeah, we are seeing that, and I just want to make a comment on your statement, even, you recognize big companies like Walmart and such, and sometimes as much as they may not be anywhere near as environmentally good as Patagonia, when you're such a big company, making some small strides can have a huge impact on things. So I'm glad that you're pointing out some of those, which are sometimes just as important, which is good. So I guess I want to go back and ask if, you mentioned some of those companies, but I'm thinking about public companies in general that are much more profit driven by kind of being forced because they're worried about the quarter end and how the stock price looks. Do you have any, it's wonderful being a B corporation and being private in that sense. Do you have any thoughts about how our capitalistic society with stock and public companies can do good things, and how does it move? How do we move toward, making the cost or the benefits public enough that people will take those into account?
I think it's going to be an interesting dilemma. There have been two examples of, well, there are several examples of large companies that have become B Corps. And one is Danone, which made its North American subsidiary a B Corp, and it has had the ambition to make the whole company a B Corp. And has done really interesting work. They had Emmanuel Faber, who's the CEO who directed all of this, was fired during sort of an activist takeover. Not so much for becoming a B Corp but just because the profits were not satisfactory to these activist investors. So there's some. On the other hand, you have Paul Pullman, who left Unilever, that said that several of those subsidiaries are B Corps, and he said that of the 400 brands under the Unilever umbrella, the 40 that were the most environmentally and socially responsible contributed half the growth and half the profits. So one other tangential comment is that I think if you look at the long-term good of a society and the long-term good of a company, they usually align pretty well. You want well-paid employees, and you want healthy communities, and you want everybody to pay their bills and suppliers to be happy and investors, etc. But the short-term goals of a business don't align with social good or environmental good, and that's a problem. I mean, I think that, and there's been a counter movement in business. Paul Pullman is not alone. I mean, I think Larry Fink is taking a lot of heat for trying to promote that with the Business Roundtable, and also with directives from BlackRock about what they expect from the companies they invest in. So there's a big tension there, and I'm hoping it will be resolved in favor of a longer term look at how business views its success.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah, time is going by quickly here. So I'd like to hear any kind of final thoughts. What message would you want people on this to take away, and yeah, what's your final kind of?
Yeah, I think especially for people who are for young people who are starting out, I would look at if you have to go to work for somebody you don't respect, don't do it for long. There's Ernest Hemingway used to say that it was okay to be if you were a writer, to get into journalism, but don't stay too long. And I think I think it's so important to be able to have colleagues that you respect and that feed you in some way, and so important to have work that satisfies you and that answers the need you have to help make the world a better place. So I wouldn't delay too long. And I think it's a good time to be graduating, or it's a good time to be, even if you're not graduating this year, the next year. There's a lot going on right now that wasn't going on 5 years ago. I mean, I think it's easy for people to forget that there weren't even any sustainability programs in universities until 2002 or 2003, and the idea of social impact is also relatively new. And the importance of business is that we can be a self-sustaining activity that helps solve some social problems. We're not going to the government to raise taxes. We're not going to rich people to empty their pockets to give us donations, along with the journalist you cited earlier. We're creating something that actually supports families and that pays its own way and does some good.
Well, that's I like the positive sentiment that you're leaving us with. I think that's really been important, and it's nice that it's the way you're putting it. It's bipartisan too, which is unusual in this. But I'm very happy to hear that. So, well, a big thank you to you, Vincent. I really definitely appreciate what a wonderful conversation, and I think it's this will be watched by many people after this. It's not just the people that are on. We'll put this up. The two books I just want to repeat is The Responsible Company by Vincent Stanley and Let My People Go Surfing by Yvonne Chouinard. And I want to thank Nina, of course, and our audience for coming and all the questions. Just on the Susilo, the next webinar that we'll be doing is called Chat GPT in Business, Ethics Anyone? And we'll have Yoav Schlesinger, an architect of ethical practice at Salesforce. And we'll have a professor of business ethics, Tae-Won Kim from Carnegie Mellon Tepper School of Business. And we'll have that in April. Please watch for the announcements for that and other upcoming events at insights.bu.edu, and enjoy a podcast that we have on there that dissects current business and current topics in business. So thank you again, Vincent and Nina.
Thanks very much. Thanks to everybody for your engagement.
Thank you, everyone who was attending. Thanks a lot.
Have a great day.